would like to welcome everybody to the Town Council workshop on July 13th, 2023. We have a hard stop this evening around 6:45, or I shouldn't say around 6:45, due to a pre-existing planning board meeting occurring at 7 o'clock in the same space, so we need to be efficient. The point of tonight's meeting is to revisit the FY24 budget, as the voters did not approve it at the June 13th, I believe,
yeah.
referendum vote. And so the agenda doesn't really have a lot of detail on it, and that was intentional. I'd like to spend this evening kind of getting our bearings around the vote, establishing a timeline for next steps after we've had some advice of our town attorney on what we can and cannot do. So I'd like to have a conversation around that. And if time allows, I would like to get some initial thoughts on what we might want to look at going forward for amendments to our current budget proposal. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds because, one, we don't have time, and two, I think that would be a disservice to just having a frank conversation about our current status. So that's my intent. Nate and I had a conversation yesterday morning. He was sharing his thoughts about possibilities for adjustments. I'd be curious, in the packet, Nate has included the warrants that were voted on, and then whether the pass-fail amounts following that. Dan, thank you for sending around your summary to all of us. That was nice to have. I think you pointed out that only, 9 of the warrants actually passed.
Yes,
and
yeah,
4
that's correct.
4 failed.
Yep.
The ones that failed were the, these aren't labeled on this, but the municipal budget, the operating budget failed, which was Article 3. You know what, I'm gonna pull up your email,
I
Dan.
have my spreadsheet if you
Yeah.
want me to read them, I'm happy to.
You sent that yesterday. Budget, take 2.
Would it help if I just read them out?
Yeah, would you?
Sure,
Yeah,
I
sorry,
got 'em right- no, I got 'em right
I'm
in front
pulling
of
it
me.
up, but yeah, that would be helpful if you have it already.
Yes, in the order that they failed, the unassigned fund transfer for land acquisition, which was Article 13, failed. The town councilor compensation failed. I wasn't really too surprised at that, given the circumstances of the vote. It usually is the lowest vote getter anyways.
Yeah.
The municipal budget, Article 3, failed next, and then the interesting, which surprised me, to be honest with you, the LD1 question failed. So, those are the 4 issues. I think that if we eliminate the LD1 question, that is probably, I would guess, the lion's share of the angst that always causes. But the LD, and I don't know if circumstances change, if that number that we had on the ballot would still be the same today as it was then, but it was $810,033 was the limit at that point in time.
Nate, do you know if that's kind of a one-to-one comparison on expenses? So if we eliminate $810,000, would LD1 just not be applicable? Or I don't feel like, it's a weird formula, so I didn't think it was that cut and dry.
It is a weird formula, so I can't say for sure yes.
Okay.
I think we'd have to talk to is it one-to-one?
Is it? Okay.
So the formula they use for calculating the threshold is weird. but the number over that threshold is dollar for dollar.
Correct, it's dollar for dollar, so if you.
Okay, would you mind, I'm sorry, would you mind coming up, Lauren? Thank you. It would just be helpful for folks at
that's
home to
fine.
understand too.
I'm
Yeah.
Lauren Asplin, I'm the assessor.
Yeah.
The LD one is, that part of the formula is dollar for dollar. So whatever the municipal appropriation decreases will decrease the LD one override at
Okay,
the same.
but at the same rate, okay. Thank you. Okay, so according to Alyssa, our town attorney, technically since LD one failed, we can revisit every of these warrant articles, because essentially the whole budget failed, even though some of the warrants passed, like the capital improvement plan. I would be in favor of doing that because I think a lot of our flexibility lies in the capital improvement reserve in particular, which was $325,000, is essentially just a savings for next year. That would make it a little more difficult to address some capital needs next year, but if we're looking to find a large sum of money, that $325,000 is not currently covering anything this year. So I don't know what people's thoughts are on that number and capital improvement.
Yeah, I wish that I could remember, but I don't, but we don't, historically, we haven't put the same amount of money into that line every year.
Right.
It's been less than that in the past. I know there's a lot going on. I could go through the budget. It would be interesting to take a look at like the last 5 years and sort of see what the average is we've put on that line. But yes, I would agree with you. I think that there is good reason for putting that amount of money there, but when there isn't enough money to go around, I think there are places that we can cut there.
Mhm. What are others' thoughts about, technically, Article 5, the capital reserve fund passed, which is what we're talking about. But since LD1 failed and the operating budget failed, we can touch the whole thing. So what are folks' thoughts on amending some of those items within the capital project? Marty, Matthew, we've heard from Dan, so.
I would cut that $50,000 for land acquisition.
Well, my one thought about that, Nate and I were talking about that yesterday, was the separate land acquisition question we had for borrowing 1/12 from the general fund failed. So if that fails again, and then we take out this $50,000 from the capital improvement plan, we'd essentially be putting no money towards any kind of land acquisition this year,
Okay.
right, Dan?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah,
One, I think it'd be good if we just stuck with one thing, so got everybody's impression like on just the capital plan
Right.
before we go on to another.
good
But
point, yeah.
in that particular case, we are gonna be actually having an old-fashioned town meeting. So, we can present things there, and amendments can be made based on, the discussion and the debate that
true.
happens between amendments.
Mhm.
And each amendment will be voted on separately, so it is a different forum than we're used to.
That's a good point, yeah. What are your thoughts on touching the capital improvement line items in general, since it was approved? Yeah.
Well, I guess if that 300, so I'm looking at this, this thing that Nate just handed out.
Yeah.
Okay. And, yeah, I guess if that top line, that 325,000 is more than is normally set aside, and that amount was set aside in part because, we thought we had more money than we did, then, yeah, if there's a big chunk of change to be gotten there to reduce that, I'm definitely in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's more than we've set aside. I believe last year we set aside 400.
Oh, okay.
I was just gonna go look,
Something on-
actually.
I don't remember exactly what it's been, and Dan was saying it might be nice to have the 5-year trend on that specific figure, which we don't
Mhm.
have in front of us, but in general, you're not opposed to going back and revisiting that.
that particular item,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
But as I'm looking at this, that the land acquisition, the $50,000 land acquisition is not part of that 325.
Correct. Yeah, so so, I know we don't have all our budget papers in front of us,
Mhm.
but the capital, improvement plan, had that $325,000 as reserve funds to carry forward into next year's, costs. The $50,000, is also sort of a savings account for land acquisition that
right.
falls under capital improvement projects.
Mhm.
And then we did have a separate warrant article for an additional, was it $417,000 to establish, a larger land acquisition fund that would provide us with more flexibility for, particularly the infrastructure projects we're trying to address, on Main Street and Yarmouth Road.
Mhm. That's not on this.
That was not part of the capital improvement, plan. The $417,000 was a separate warrant article because
Mhm.
we were borrowing from the general fund.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, if I could just ask, how much of this 325,000 is sort of, I don't know if earmarked is the right word, but like, are there plans for that money that will, make,
Go ahead, Nate.
Try to
Yeah.
answer that.
Mhm.
Counselor, we were looking at the projected fiscal year '25 budget, and I'm going to pull that up here.
yeah, and so this money would have been set aside for that.
FY25,
Correct. It
correct.
was saving ahead
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
the CIP budget for '25. This year, the CIP budget was 1.444 million. Next year is 1.3 million. And that is assuming that we are bonding for the proposed acquisition of a public safety vehicle that needs to be purchased, rather than purchasing it outright. So the initial idea was that saving that money would help with the outright purchase of about $900,000. And now that we're factoring in as a lease-to-own agreement, presumably council would consider something like that. That figure went down from 900,000 to maybe under 100,000 a year for a 12-year lease-to-own agreement.
It's also just a good idea to set aside, if we have extra funds, to set aside some extra funds, towards those capital improvements every year, because a lot of times the costs for things we're estimating
Mhm.
in future years comes back a lot different in the actual year.
And I agree with that. I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting that we should zero that out or.
Right, okay.
Yeah, every year, we don't have the same exact capital expenditure every year. So we have, and the staff's worked hard to spread it out as best we can, so there aren't huge peaks and valleys. But to Nate's point, the lease-to-own program has helped us stretch those dollars further than we were able to in the past.
So it sounds like we're all in favor of revisiting the entire budget and not just the elements that passed or failed.
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
Mhm.
Nate, would you mind taking some time to just go over the timeline that we're operating under?
Sure.
I know that currently we're operating with FY23 budget numbers because it's the new fiscal year as of July 1st. What does that look like for
Sure.
on us needing to get a budget approved, and how long we can operate with that? with
Sure
those?
thing. I'd be happy to.
Sure.
So what we have scheduled so far is your meeting today. We have another workshop meeting scheduled for next Thursday. Your next regular town council meeting is Tuesday, August the 15th, which is not to say that you couldn't schedule a special meeting. But there was some, basically, once you agree to a set of warrant articles that you would like to have presented at a town meeting, we need at least 7 days from when those are approved to the date of the town meeting. We need to schedule the town meeting location, and we need to schedule a moderator for your town meeting. So the moderator will run the meeting. There may be some room in the meeting for the council to address the attendees, it might be advisable for you to have a separate meeting, like a public meeting to review the budget again, if you care to, once you've agreed to it, or you could just have that conversation at the meeting where you approve the warrant articles. And then got this email back from the town attorney today, that if there's this provision in the budget the town charter, Article 5, Section 4A2, if there is a period between the beginning of the fiscal year and the appropriation of funds, the council may authorize expenditures for proposed departmental expenses chargeable to the appropriations for the year when made in amounts sufficient to cover the necessary expenses of the various departments, offices, and agencies not to exceed the prior fiscal year's budget amount. So there are numerous projects that are on hold, particularly CIP projects that are in next year's budget, and that's largely buildings and grounds. There's hiring on hold, and it would be ideal to have a budget approved as soon as is expedient for you. There was a conversation this morning in the department heads meeting about a provision of the charter about a 3/12 rule requiring that we would have to have a budget by October 1st or we would run out of money. The town attorney does not have the same opinion, so I want to, or hasn't conveyed that, so I want to clarify that and get back to you once I have definitive clarification on that. But this email she sent to me was in response to that question, and it seems to indicate that she doesn't believe that that 3/12 provision applies to the budget. So I'll get total confirmation for you on that and let you know as soon as I can.
So the way you're reading her email from today, Alyssa, the town attorney, we could technically operate with FY '23 numbers as long as the council's approving those
Yes.
funds
It,
for as long as we need to? Is that the way you're currently reading?
Presumably so, but I will also add this. Typically what happens at a town meeting is you'll go in and present a warrant article and the participants will review it, and if somebody wants to make a motion to reduce it, reduce whatever figure, there can be a town vote on that. So there could be a vote, and this is what happens in other places where they do town meetings. There could be a vote to reduce the budget by some amount, and then, we would just have to figure that out as a operating issue.
I think it's fair to say, though, that we will come out of the town meeting with a budget.
And that's what, yes, that's exactly what I
That's
was
the
leading up
bottom line,
to.
yeah.
You will, unless something goes very badly, in an unprecedented way, you will have a budget coming out of a town meeting.
So we can presumably stay there as long as we need to until we get
Until
it
you
passed
get it.
and have, like, the amendments just go on until it's,
Yep.
everyone's in favor? Okay, I've just
And-
never
and
been to one. so-
To
It's
that.
been a long time since.
Yeah.
I've seen them, but I haven't been to one. To that point, one of the recommendations was to split out the operating budget and the CIP budget into its individual elements and have separate questions on each of those elements, so that if somebody didn't like the administration budget, they're not gonna vote down the entire budget because they wanna see a change in wages.
Well, sorry.
And so I just wanted to present that to you as options and alternatives that you have to help, guide the process toward a successful outcome.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was gonna say, I assumed that we would have the articles that we had on the ballot. And so that would accomplish kind of what you're saying. I mean, in this particular case, the CIP budget, passed by, a reasonable margin. I think there is support, I think we've built support for the infrastructure upkeep and the changes we've made to that, so. I guess that was intended to be a question, will we have the same 13 articles or 14 articles at the town meeting that we had on the referendum?
So you can, or you could, for example, split Article 3 into
Pieces.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces, and vote on each of those 8 pieces of the budget separately, and likewise for this capital CIP budget, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 12 components of the capital budget. One of them's zero funded, and one of them is the land acquisition fund. And then the capital project reserve fund, those, you may choose to zero those out. I think that would be each of those would be a budget question if you were to split Article 5 into 12 pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there are some communities that basically go down line item by line item and end up with, 70 votes. I'm not sure we have to split things that fine by
I
myself.
feel like if, the way the school board, budget meeting worked was that they did have a presentation by the superintendent before they went to the formal moderator for voting. I think if we have at least an opportunity to present, whether that's Nate or me or several of us presenting elements of what we are asking the voters to approve, I think we could explain what everything is and then have the vote the way it is currently. I don't know if breaking each one down is going to be, I feel like that's just gonna leave a lot of space for, we're gonna be there all night.
Oh,
If we
yeah.
did that,
I was
I
gonna
don't
say,
know, I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
inevitably, when you vote, you hold your nose on some portion of what you're voting for. I mean,
Right.
unless we vote on every line item, so yeah, I would agree. I don't want to split it down. I wouldn't split it down, I don't think, a lot more than what we already have. I think there's some, and I think by having the presentation at the beginning of the meeting, we can lay the groundwork,
Right.
even, informing people the fact that, 9 of the 14 or 13 articles passed, so. You're not gonna, we're not gonna get a lot of arm twisting over, do we have permission to spend grants and gifts money? Or do we have permission to spend all the
No.
money the state and the federal government give us?
Yeah.
I think it's silly, to be honest with you, that we have to put those on our referendum ballot, but
Right.
honest with you.
Just accepting money from grants, it seems a little,
Yeah,
but I understand they're there.
I think the big ones, the land acquisition piece is gonna be the big one. I don't think we did as good a job as we might have, helping people understand that that money wasn't just for buying open space or any old piece of property, but that it was for the acquisition or the possible acquisition of rights of way, as opposed to actually land,
Right.
and some of those other things. So I think, I'm hoping that with perhaps another attempt to explain that, we can build more support for that.
Nate, I know Alyssa mentioned, that there are, and you just said this a minute ago, that there are individuals whose job it is to be moderator at these events, and that we would need to, essentially hire someone to do that. What, have you found out any more about what the process is for that, or where we would go?
There are people who are, for example, I attended a training class for this that MMA offers for town meeting moderation. I would not be obviously the right person to moderate Gray's town meeting, but there are other people who have taken that course. There are other people who have been moderators for town meetings for years. They're just sort of brand name people.
Yeah, people like Donnie Carroll or
Someone like Donnie
Mitch
Carroll.
Berkowitz,
Or
both
Mitch.
have been
Berkowitz,
moderators
that-
in the back.
So how would we go about reaching out to them? I'm assuming we would probably need to, we need to firm up a date first,
Yeah.
but,
I would start calling around and trying to identify candidates, and it would depend on your timeline. I would just like to get a sense of how many meetings do you feel
Right.
you're going to,
okay, that's what I
Need
wanted to
and
talk about next, actually.
that sort of thing,
Okay,
which you may not know tonight.
right.
Well, the last time the budget failed, we were able to pull together another referendum at the beginning of September.
Right. But the last time the budget failed, I believe the only vote was didn't we just only vote on LD one again? I wasn't on council at the time, I'm just speaking as a voter.
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, Dan, you've been through this before, what is your sense for the need for meetings, and what do you think a realistic timeline is?
Well, I think that the hardest part of the discussion is figuring out what will people support. I mean, we know what they won't support now, but we don't know specifically what they will support. I guess, when we started our meeting, my thought is that at the very least, I think we have to eliminate the LD1 question. So that means we have to find, $811,000 in cuts. I think without an LD1 question, we could probably pass a budget. But that's, to be honest with you, just my best hunch.
Okay,
And I think that coming up with sort of a target is not the ideal way to assemble a budget, but it would give us a clear goal to shoot for.
right. Nate, you mentioned last time we spoke about the timeline that you were hoping to get something, like kind of shoot for end of August for a town meeting. Do you still feel like that's realistic?
Well, again, it is for, I believe it is for us. It would be nice, I'm looking at my calendar, it would be nice to come out of your next Thursday meeting with some sense of what you want to do. If for your August 15th meeting, the packet deadline is Wednesday, the 9th of August, we need time in advance of that between the 20th and any other subsequent workshops you want to have. We need time to work up with the town attorney and the assessor and the finance director new warrant articles and get those proofread. And that took a little bit of time.
Do
That
those have to
process
be
takes time.
approved at a full council meeting, or would we need to call a special meeting if we don't do it on August 15th?
You can call a special meeting.
Okay, but it would need to be a full,
You would need to have
Council
a
meeting.
council meeting,
Yeah.
not a
Okay.
workshop.
right,
It's the only time we can vote.
yeah, right. Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on the timeline? We don't really know what it is yet, but I'm just trying to, big picture. Okay, so,
Yeah, I think it would be great if we could do it by the end of August.
right.
Sooner the better.
I just really worry about attendance in the summer. People just aren't around, people are on vacation, and maybe perhaps by end of August, people will be back preparing for school year or whatnot, what have you, but,
Well, you could kick it to the, the first Saturday after Labor Day, or, it doesn't have to be on a Saturday, but.
Staff would have suggested, asked for either a Tuesday evening or a Saturday.
I think a Saturday is probably gonna bring out the most people, myself.
I would think so. Would both of you be available on a Saturday?
Oh, yeah.
No, generally, I mean, if I know in advance, I
Right.
can make sure I am. I don't think I've got many Saturdays in September.
Right, we do have our council retreat planned for September 16th, so we could move that if needed, but, I'd rather not.
You could do Saturday the 9th, then, if you wanna do the first Saturday after Labor Day.
Right. Why don't we shoot for the 9th? I just feel like that last week in August for people is gonna be really hard.
Okay.
Particularly people with children, I just know it's just crazy time.
Well, it's interesting, because, we have the referendum vote, and people vote no, and then I really don't know what to expect for a turnout for a town meeting. It will be substantially less than what we got. for-
Right, we had
for
just
referendum.
under 1,000 people attend in June.
Yeah. If we got 100 to a town meeting, I'd almost be surprised. I hate to say that, but.
Right, I can't recall what New Gloucester's attendance was this year for town meeting, but
When you say attend in June, you mean voted?
voted,
People that
sorry,
voted, yeah.
yes, yeah.
mean,
Wrong use of word.
Well, no, I mean, they call it a town meeting, right?
They do technically, yeah. Our charters.
I just need to clarify
Yeah.
what I'm hearing.
One thing I mentioned to Nate, which I don't know what it would do for cost, but I do think having a childcare option for people attending a town meeting would be welcoming, and also allow people with childcare issues to attend more easily, especially if they have one parent that can attend and then one has to stay home with the children if they're, I just know from my own experience with my children, they're not gonna sit through a town meeting. I can imagine that folks that have those constraints, it would find it difficult. So I know New Gloucester offered childcare, I think a couple years ago, and I heard some positive things around that. So I think, Nate, you were gonna look into what that might look like here. But part of the consideration, if we were to use staff, Gray Rec staff for childcare, would definitely be location. I think, I don't know if New Begin would be the most logical space for that, since there's a downstairs space they often use for childcare facilities. So I guess that brings me to my next question, where people think we should hold this. I think the library is too small, personally. This room is too small. The other options would be either high school or middle school gymnasiums, or,
Yeah, when we had that other meeting that night.
right, or New Begin, potentially.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
What
Well,
others think?
I mean,
I-
New Begin sounds, if it's big enough, I think that sounds pretty attractive.
I don't know how many do you know how many people
I
New Begin
don't,
Gym can hold? Anyone? No?
The acoustics don't look terribly good, but, I mean,
pack a room full of people, it might help, but
yeah.
I'll ask him.
Okay.
Yeah, either New Begin or the high school cafeteria, I think would be.
Okay. You don't think the middle school gym would be amenable to?
I
To the
think that,
situation?
I think the high school cafeteria would be better set up for a meeting like that.
Okay. Is that their cafetorium
Yes,
thing? Yeah, okay. It's a weird space.
Yeah.
All right. And then one other thing I wanted to raise, just in regards to the warrants. One of the warrants that did pass was, kind of surprisingly, was the bond. Personally, I would be in favor of leaving that as is. I think what we had for the bond paying for are things that we really cannot put off any longer, such as the 70-year-old septic system around Pennell, and also a lot of the maintenance on these buildings to support an expansion of critical services in town, such as childcare. And there definitely was some support around the bond. Let me just pull up the exact numbers.
I would be in favor of lumping all the things that passed together as one vote.
It was 511 to 452.
511 to 452, the bond passed, so, not an overwhelming number, but certainly not, 4 votes or something super close. When you say you'd be amenable to lumping all the things that passed into one vote,
Yeah, I don't know if that's.
I don't know if we
doable,
can
but-
do that, because if we touch the capital improvement article that passed, then that wouldn't work.
I guess that's my question. If we can just talk about the things that failed, or we can open up the whole budget. If we open up the whole budget, does that mean we have to revote everything in the budget? Or can we pick and choose?
My understanding from the lawyer was we can pick and choose, but perhaps that's not the right way to go. If we are opening it up, maybe we should just open it up.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned that potentially, depending on the turnout, that might fail, but, and they really are critical projects for the town.
Yeah.
That if we tried to fund that, just outright in 1 year, people are concerned about property taxes going up now, that would make the situation even worse. Spreading it out over a bond over 5 years lessens the tax implication in the current year. So-
Well, and I think we had a strong case for that, because our bond payments are starting to trend downwards as we pay off the bonds, and I believe this is accurate. Even with this bond, we were still seeing
Yeah.
a slight decrease
We
from
were.
last year as far as our bond payments were concerned. So I think that's one of the reasons why it may have passed.
Mhm.
And then again, I think the CIP passed because people see the value, I think, of of keeping things in good working order.
Yes, that's important.
So are you suggesting that we don't have that article on the, at the town meeting
I
at all?
mean, yeah, ideally, I would like to leave that one off, but, Dan makes a good point that if we're opening up other items that passed, perhaps we should just open all of them up, so. If others feel strongly in that camp, but, we'll go along with that, certainly.
Yeah, I guess I'm inclined to say that if there's something we wanna, something that we think is in a different category that we wanna take off the town meeting agenda, then I think we should consider that.
Right, because Alyssa pointed out that, technically, the bond, correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, but the LD one doesn't affect the bond specifically,
So
so,
it doesn't affect the bond, but
Right.
it does affect the CIP Article 5. No, sorry, the Article 3, because the debt service for the bond is in Article
in there,
3.
yep.
So
Oh, right.
the voters approve the bond, but not the
But not
funding
the
for the
payment.
payment. So
no, they did approve the payment, because they approved not Article 5, they approved CIP.
I think the bond,
Is it
no,
in-
that's right, you're right, CIP
Yeah.
is in debt services.
Yeah.
and okay. So, yeah, those, if you look at it that way, those two were both approved.
And what we're talking about here is Article 14, right?
Article 14 was the bond, and then the bond payment for the next 5 years, if that passes and stays passed,
I mean,
is addressed through the CIP fund, which was also approved, which was Article 5.
Right, but we've agreed we're gonna open up the CIP up.
Right, we are.
I mean, when you look at this, you're not gonna balance this budget by not paying the town councilors.
No,
And you're not gonna balance this budget by cutting out the land acquisition money.
which land acquisition? You mean the
Article 13.
Article
Article
13
13,
portion? Yeah.
Um,
I mean, theoretically, we could use some of the 1/12 that we're borrowing for land acquisition, or proposing that we borrow for land acquisition, to decrease some of the costs
Yes,
this year,
yeah,
that impact, and still pay for them. They wouldn't come out of people's tax bill, as it's already part of our savings. Perhaps that's a conversation we should have.
yeah, the 1/12, I mean, we did the 1/12, the last time we did the 1/12 was with the ladder truck. We have 5 years by the charter to pay that money back, and we paid it back in 4. It's, the closest thing I can think of, it's kind of like borrowing from your 401K.
Yeah.
You're borrowing from yourself.
But
So
there's no,
we're-
there's
you're
no
actually-
interest, there's
Well,
no
you're actually
interest.
saving the interest on that, right, exactly, and it's not like that money is sitting somewhere being invested, so. I think that, before I got in the council, I wouldn't have known what 3/12 and 1/12 were,
I
and how that
definitely didn't.
actually affected the budget. I think that's something that we can explain to people. And I think it's a practical enough solution that I feel like we could, that once we explain it, people will support it.
So what was everyone's consensus on, revisiting all the articles, including Article 14, which is the bond, or just revisiting 1 through 13 and leaving the bond as an approved article?
I'm okay with, I think it would be better to open it all than to set aside just one thing, just from the standpoint of, I'm not worried, I guess, about getting people to support that again. I think there's, for all the reasons we've talked about, I think that, it's work that needs to be done, it's work that's been put off. We're borrowing the money, which is spreading the expense. We're still seeing the amount of money that we're spending on our bonds go down even with this borrowing. I just don't think that's the reason why people are gonna vote against the budget,
Okay.
myself personally.
What are your thoughts, Marty?
Yeah, I agree with Dan, get it all out in the open.
Okay. Matthew, what do you think?
Well, I guess I'm inclined to say we shouldn't include 14 if it's, you know, it's bonded money,
Okay.
you know, how much is it really gonna affect the budget? I guess I don't understand that yet, but I mean, something that was,
Oh, I can help.
something that was approved, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
So I guess I'm inclined to seeing that article as different from the rest.
So
I mean,
maintaining the approval that's already been,
yeah, if that's an option,
okay.
I favor that.
Anne is out of town, so we're kind of tied on that, so perhaps we can revisit that
Yep.
as a question when she has returned. Nate,
If it's helpful, I can just let you know that the bond debt service in FY '23 was $1,306,000. The proposed bond payment in '24 is $1,347,000, so that's an increase of $41,000.
Okay, so.
And the bond payment is $197,000 a year for the proposed bond.
Thank you for correcting me.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
And that bond payment number is still in Article 3.
it's in Article 5.
Article
Yes.
5, excuse me.
Yeah.
Which also
Mhm.
passed.
Which did pass technically, but we're revisiting some of the figures in that potentially to give us some room for making adjustments to expenses, so.
Would it be okay if I check with the town attorney just to be sure if there's any
Yeah,
recommendations?
I think
from her?
so, because we haven't really decided
Yeah.
since we're kind of tied.
Right, and I definitely don't want to, you know, disallow people to come to a town meeting from having options to, have, you know, I'm not really that crazy about the idea of limiting their options, but if this is something, and I guess if this is something we wanna do, you know, send that message, I wonder what is I mean, can the town meeting override that? And add that item to the, you know, like add an article at the meeting, or?
So you can't add an article,
Okay.
and you can't increase the budget, but the budgets can be decreased.
Mhm. So then we really would be sort of denying people the option of considering that if we didn't have it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they did consider it at the
Yes.
polls in June, and they voted for it, so I mean,
Right, we're actually
Yeah.
proceeding to give them, you know, like, if we put everything on the agenda, other than that, we're actually including more options than we really need to.
correct, yeah. Okay, so we'll revisit that as a topic. All right, so we have about an hour left. Does anyone have any outstanding questions on the process? No, okay. Okay, so why don't we try to look at figures and, just kind of get a rough idea of people's initial thoughts. I'll start, because what I would like to say is, the biggest expense increase that in this budget was, wages and salary adjustments, for staff. And I am wholeheartedly in favor of maintaining the promises we've made to staff. We're doing a wage adjustment over the course of 2 years. We did a portion of it last year, and we were gonna do the remaining portion, to come up to market rate, salaries for a lot of the positions on staff. And we had made a commitment to do that. I would like to maintain that as much as possible. There is also currently a 6% COLA increase on top of those wage adjustments. I believe 2% of that 6%, Nate, was performance-based, and 4% would just be across the board. We might have a little flexibility on that number, but in particular, the wage adjustments that we began last year, I would very much like to retain.
I can support you on that. I agree 100% with that.
Does
I
anyone-
do too.
Dan, did you have thoughts around
You're in.
that one element?
Yeah, I think you know, we looked at where we are as a community compared to other like communities, to see how we were paying people. It was clear that we were further behind than we could afford to be and expect to attract and keep people. So yeah, I support 100% the adjustment piece. The COLA piece, I think we can talk about a little bit. There may be some room there to move a little bit. So yeah, I would agree with that.
In regards to things that are quote-unquote easy, I wouldn't make cuts with, necessarily call them that, but was the one we discussed earlier, the $325,000 in reserve for the CIP. We could also potentially put off one of the staff positions that we were looking to hire this year, the Public Works Administrator, which included an increase in salary to support their skills as an engineer for the town, in addition to being an administrator for 2 departments. Nate has indicated that Tim, our interim Public Works Director, would be willing to stay in that role, at least for another year, if need be. And then Nate, you've created this spreadsheet that you handed out that had some other suggestions that were, you said one page was easy and one,
Well, the
Easy
front
cuts.
page, the front page is what
Yeah.
I recommend, and the other page is some other items that department heads suggested might be for consideration, but I don't necessarily support them. The town has had a practice of purchasing the school resource officer vehicle or the town deputy sheriff vehicle after it's finished its service life with the county. And they're nice vehicles, but if we don't need a Chevy Tahoe for any particular purpose, and I don't know of one that we do, I just as soon take that out of the budget. It's a moot point this year because they're not surplusing that vehicle. So even if you wanted to acquire it, you can't. And I've also accordingly reduced the SRO law enforcement budget by the $41,000 because the vehicle is not being replaced this year. So there's $75,000 right there that it's de facto that's going to happen regardless of any deliberations.
Are they eliminating a SRO position?
No, they're not they're not including a vehicle replacement in the budget because they're keeping the vehicle for another year.
Okay.
So
There
that
still
would
will
be-
be an officer, a
but-
deputy.
but that's a fee we'd most likely have to pay next year. when
It
they
will
do-
come back, yeah,
Yeah.
probably next year, probably for both the SRO and the deputy vehicle.
And this is the document we're looking at, oh, there's something on the back.
So if you look in their expense CIP line 2 SRO vehicle, and then expense line 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a SRO contract. That's the town's portion of the SRO contract. We share that position with the school. The school pays for most of it.
Alright, so I see how you get the 75,000.
Okay, yeah.
So that's what I don't know. So are we not having usually what happens is during the non-school months, that person works for the
Yeah,
town.
I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. This is an adjustment to the contract because they're not replacing the vehicle this year.
So why would there be the vehicle and the law enforcement line?
Because we usually buy the vehicle. So we would be paying them for their contract fee for the county to buy a new vehicle, and then we would be buying out the surplus vehicle.
So
We
we
would-
would be
we-
paying the 79 for the new vehicle and buying the other one for
Well,
34? Is that basically?
The
right?
79 includes fees to support the SRO position. 41,000 of that, right?
That's the
Would have been to
vehicle
support their
portion.
vehicle.
Right, our share of the vehicle would be the 41,000.
Right, and then
difference.
the 34,000 we had set aside to purchase an SRO vehicle was for town municipal use.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So you put those two together, it's 75K.
but they're not, the SRO officer is not getting a new vehicle this year.
That's correct.
Which eliminates the 41,000, and then we're not going to buy it because it's not available.
That's correct.
Which
There
is-
will still be, we will still have the deputy who's in the SRO position working for Gray for the summer months.
So your proposed line or column, that is what you want to keep in the budget?
That's,
Right.
yes,
as
Go
opposed to.
go from prior to proposed, and the difference is in the next
Okay,
column.
so the proposed isn't what you're proposing to cut, gotcha.
Correct.
So then you're recommending to cut all that 325,000? Is that?
I'm just putting, this is really not my recommendation.
Okay.
This is
Alright.
just what I'm piecing together from your conversations and some of the things that I think are easier cuts to make, rather than the other ones where department heads have brought them up, but I'm not necessarily in support of that.
Yeah, I won't vote for a budget that zeroes out the,
That zeroes out the reserve for
Yeah.
the CIP?
yep,
Okay.
I can't support that much of a,
It does feel like an irresponsible way to
Well, I-
look to the future, for
I'd wanna
sure.
see what it does to the future. I have to believe it would generate some holes going forward.
I think it would,
So
yeah.
I would just wanna understand the impact. I'm not saying I'm adverse to not putting as much money in there this year. But I would wanna see the effect of the change.
Well, any money we retain in that reserve, just keep in mind, will need to come from somewhere else if we're trying to
Right.
look for cuts. So that might mean services are cut or something, we don't have as much money to pave roads or, whatever we end up deciding, just.
Yep. Well, to set aside, quite
Right.
frankly, for CIP, some of that might actually go to help pave roads in the future. So, I mean,
Right.
it's not assigned to any particular
Mhm.
portion of the CIP account.
Oh, one thing Nate did inform me of yesterday, and he's noted here in his paper, was that the estimated revenues we were receiving from cable franchise fees, we've increased back up to $98,000. It was previously estimated we would only be getting $50,000 from our cable franchise fees, but that's
Mm.
not in line with the contract we had with them. So that's an extra $48,000 that we hadn't accounted for.
Okay.
Okay. Was there anything else people thought was kind of an obvious way to chip away at this budget, aside from the reserve or the engineer position? Anyone?
I think in light of what the state's been doing, I think sunsetting the local senior property tax credit is a viable cut.
I would like to know where the state landed with amending their stabilization program.
They came out, basically, they're using two existing programs to funnel people through, and they're means testing it more. One of the things the state program does that I would have supported the senior tax credit program that we created is that that money will be returned to the state when the person's estate is settled. So it's not they're not just giving the money to people, they're essentially loaning it to them.
That's different than the stabilization act that they passed last year,
Oh,
though,
it's
right?
completely different.
Yeah, that's right.
They've thrown that right
Yeah,
out
because
the
that's more
window.
like a lien on your property, whereas this was more just like securing your taxes at the rate they're at for
Yeah, that's gone
as long as you,
completely now.
is that gone? I
Yep,
don't,
they're sunsetting it with this, after this year.
Nate, you had an
So
update
I
around
just
that?
have some material that I got from Lauren today.
Okay.
There are 2 existing state programs that are being expanded that have a benefit for middle-income older people. One is the property tax fairness credit, which currently allows eligible Mainers to take a $1,500 tax credit. That was increased by $500 to $2,000. And the new legislation also loosens the limits on the program in a way that allows the benefits to remain constant for a Mainer whose spouse or partner passes away.
That is a credit they receive on their income taxes that they file, isn't
Right.
it? Correct?
Yes, in the
So,
Maine 1040.
Do you know, and you might not, do you know if they don't pay the amount? So a lot of, the way credits work a lot is that you have to pay that much in taxes in order to get it back. But some of them allow you to get money back from the
No,
state.
it's, Lauren's saying
Yeah.
it's not. It's a
Okay.
credit on your tax bill.
They haven't released all the details yet.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And then the second one is the property tax deferral program that Councilor McGuire is mentioning, is a lifeline program that covers the annual property tax bills of Maine. Seniors age 65 and older who cannot afford to pay them on their own, that's been expanded to double the income limit on that program to $80,000 and raises the asset limit. The taxes will be paid back when the home is sold or becomes part of an estate. So this is another state program not administered by the town of Gray, but provides a similar type of relief benefit to what was envisioned for your senior property tax assistance program.
Well, but again, that program you just finished talking about would require the owners to pay back the state once their estate was sold, whereas our local program is just forgiving an amount on a year-to-year basis from their property tax bill, which
That's
is not.
correct. Yep.
And,
Yeah.
and that local program you're talking about is for seniors and is means tested, or?
Yes, our local program is means tested, and I believe we lowered the age to 65 last year. It was
Correct.
70. And it provides up to, I believe, $500 in property tax reduction based on where you fall in the income scale.
Yeah, okay.
So Dan, we set aside $19,000 for that, to support that program this year locally. But Dan is proposing we revisit that figure since the state has expanded some of their resources for lower income older adults who need support for property taxes. Correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for my part, I mean, and I, this is just off, this is not within the context of everything we need to deal with, but, I really favor a means-tested,
Yes.
tax relief option, and I would say regardless of age, you know, I mean, I know we can't expand it like that now, but, I mean, I really favor that, because when I hear, you know, people talk about, you know, the property tax impact on low-income people, that is, you know, that's a real thing that really bites,
Yeah.
you know, on me. So to the extent that, you know, but on the other hand, I don't think we should be necessarily making budget decisions based solely on that. So to the extent that we can relieve that effect on elders, but also on, you know, on people with families, or, you know, or people in general, you know, veterans, whatever. I think that means-tested property tax relief is a personal priority for me.
Right. We were all in agreement on the prior council that the means testing was certainly an important piece of that
The
local.
majority was.
Yeah, local program. What we found frustrating with the state's stabilization program last year, which froze anyone over 60, I think was the state program. It was either 60 or 65. If they applied to freeze their taxes at the current year rate
Mhm.
and then reapplied every year, they could keep their taxes at a stable rate and it would not go up even if the mill rate went up and the taxes went up for everybody else. But that was not means tested at the state level,
Right.
which is what we were, and then we were also having this local program on top of that, and so we were kind of double dipping essentially on the relief programs.
But that state program is no more.
That's that's what you're saying, they
LD 290 was repealed,
repealed that?
Yep.
Okay.
effective October 11th.
Well, I'm definitely in favor of taking a look at our program. I wish I personally, I wish what the state didn't so much, I don't know, I'm glad that they got rid of the stabilization program and the format they were using for that relief, but I don't necessarily agree that what they've included is enough personally. But I think we should have our conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think after 1 year, they saw the writing on the wall as far as the cost of the program going forward.
Well, they were supposed to be reimbursing towns for the difference. But we've all seen how long that potentially lasts
Well-
from those reimbursements from the state. And,
Even with the convoluted process, they created aside, the cost of the program was gonna be exponential over time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, just on a personal note, I'm 60, and I'm in a financially better place than I was when I was 40, you know, when I had 2 kids. You know, why would I get a benefit now, you know, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you brought that up, Dan, when we were talking about the senior property tax program initially. Didn't you say some, I wasn't on
Well,
council at the time,
Yeah,
actually,
no,
but.
I mean, my objections to the programs, program one is it wasn't a revolving fund, however you set that up. Two, in my time on the council, of the 4 people who have come to us looking for some assistance in keeping their property because they were struggling to pay taxes, only one of those people would have qualified for our own senior tax credit. The other 3 were much younger. My other objection to the program is that you know, everyone pays their property tax. It's not means tested, and we're forcibly taking money away from some people who have actually less and giving it to others who have maybe property rich, have more. I just don't think that's a fair and equitable solution. So, yeah, I have been against it since the beginning.
The state's program.
Ours as well, yeah. I mean, if I can't afford to live in my house, I don't expect my neighbors to help me pay for that. I'm gonna have to figure it out, either through having my children help me or selling my house and finding a less expensive place to live. I just don't think it's the town's responsibility to help people stay in their homes.
But I think I
Yeah.
remember you saying that, but I think I recall you saying, and please, I'm putting words in your mouth, but, just similar to what Matthew was saying, that, if we are going to means test and we are going to have this program, perhaps it shouldn't just be about seniors, and
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
anybody's struggling, perhaps it's.
I don't see why I should get a break just because I've managed to survive for 65 years.
Right.
I don't see where that nets me anything special myself. I think we do way too much parsing of this, that, and the other thing. So anyways, that's where I'm at. I think we have to cut it, I think we have to get rid of the LD1 question myself. I'm not in favor of cutting everything out of what we want to put in CIP. Well, you know, like I said before, I suspect that Nate and the staff would rather recommend the cuts than have me go through and find them. We're partway there now. I'm certainly not prepared tonight, but will be by the next time we meet, to bring enough cuts to get us down below the $811,000 we need to find in order to eliminate the LD1 question. It's not that I wanted to do that. I personally voted for the budget, but I think that's what we need to do in order to get it to
Right.
pass.
Well, just in the things we've identified, we're pretty far off that $800,000 marker, so
Yep.
we don't need to have more conversations, for sure. Honestly, there's not a lot of big things where we could just say, oh, let's get rid of that giant chunk of money, and then it will bring us back down under the LD1 threshold. So, yeah, it's gonna be difficult to really go line by line. Nate, next week, I'm just trying to think about what would be most helpful for us to start this conversation about basically finding all the little things we need to cut. What do we have for our expense reports at this point that, so, does everyone feel like we should have line items by department that we printed out for expenses again, or, cause I'm not sure where to find the most recent version that we had of
From
that.
your last council meeting packet, that was the most recent version of the year-to-date line item spending.
Okay.
So
That didn't have the budget proposals in it.
did not. That's on an Excel spreadsheet. But the year-to-date figures were in your last council packet. So we can double check and see if there's any revised end-of-year figures we can provide.
But those were FY '23 and 3 numbers.
that's
I'm
right.
talking about the proposed FY '24 expense budget
Yeah,
we had that had, line items by department.
Yeah, we can produce the proposed FY '24 budget out of Trio. It's in there as the last version, the council-approved version. We should be able to print that, no problem.
Okay, because I think we need that again if we're gonna be trying to find small items.
Well, especially for Matthew and Ann.
Right, and then also, it would be helpful to have a cleaned up version of the FY '24 CIP figures.
Okay,
Um,
so remove
Because
all of
I
the-
know we had a lot of like crossed out items that we'd kind of shuffled around, but it's
You wanna just get the clean,
the clean
okay,
version of that.
okay, I can do that.
Now, would that expense budget that you were talking for 2024, that would not include what was expended in 2023 or what was budgeted in 2023?
It usually does have some FY '23 figures about proposed and year-to-date expenses in there. So
Okay.
it would have a comparison between FY '23 and FY '24,
Okay.
line by line, yeah.
And that's something we'll get for the next workshop?
That's what I'm asking, yeah, because
Okay.
we usually have those multiple times throughout the budget season where we have them at the beginning based on what department heads have recommended for expenditures in the coming year. And then we go line by department to discuss
Yeah, yeah.
those, and we make amendments, and then we update them and so on. But I'm not sure when the most accurate one was at this point, so I just would like to recreate it, so we're working with current figures.
Okay. And when would we have a little lead time before next Thursday to look at it as opposed to getting it on Thursday?
Yeah, so
I'll
the-
try to get it to you as early as we can.
Right, that's why
Okay.
I'm bringing it up, so we can get it done. I'm just wondering if anybody else has ideas about what would be useful for making these decisions in terms of documents. Sure.
I'm interested in what other people think about Dan's proposal of $811,000, trying to find $811,000.
Oh, you would like to,
I'm just curious what other people think about that.
yeah, it would certainly make passing the budget easier if we didn't have to also pass an LD1 override. I think it's a good goal to shoot for. I just honestly don't know if it's that realistic to get quite that high, because it looks like we're increasing a lot of costs, but most of them are just to support staff, to support retirement, and to provide basic services. A lot of the increases we saw this year really were inflationary, electricity, also just increased membership dues and professional service fees that we just can't not pay. We have to pay our electricity, we have to pay legal fees. So as I was saying at the beginning of the meeting, the real bulk of the increase were wage adjustments and things that would support our staff so that they can do the work that they've been doing and do it, efficiently, and also, and so that we're still competitive with the towns around us, and that they want to, people want to work here.
That's important.
Yeah, I totally support that. I would be interested in taking that off the table, sort of those pay increases.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm curious what the 811 means to the town, and if we could get some.
That's what we would have to find out.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Nate.
Just-
Nate's who I want to hear.
If it's helpful for me to frame it this way, I will. Two things. One is, if you include public safety, fire and EMS, roads in all of its iterations in the budget, recycling, transfer station, and the code office, which is a law enforcement entity, that's 50% of the town budget. And that doesn't include the administrative overhead, the bonds, the other spending that needs to be done that supports those departments' operation in the backflow. So, 60% of the town budget is totally out of the municipality's control. of the part that's in our control, half of it is essential services that if we don't provide, means that roads don't get plowed and sanded and salted, and EMS services can't respond, and codes are not enforced and ordinances are not enforced, which is a public safety issue. Other than the figures that I've presented to you, the department heads and I would have a really hard time recommending any cuts to operational budgets beyond what's already proposed as far as the costs of utilities, the costs of wages and benefits, the costs of operational expenses to keep the town running efficiently. And the worst scenario, a bad scenario for us is to tell you we can do it for $800 and it really costs $1,000 and we know that, and you approve a budget for $800 and we need to spend $1,000. And so we try to keep our budgets as lean as we can on the line item level. The council may, at your discretion, find some line items that we feel are essential that you may think can be moved away, and that's a part of our process. But there's a point at which the budgets become so lean in the line items that we don't have any play if something unexpected comes up. And there's a point at which things that we feel are beneficial to the town in the like longer term vision of the level of professional development and customer service Gray residents expect, we start to run at the risk of that if we cut too deeply. So if that's obvious to everyone, I apologize, but I just wanted to make that point because we want to work with you on crafting a budget that makes sense. And we're sort of at a place where we're going to start cutting into operational items that are valuable to the town.
So let me know if I'm taking up too much time.
No, you're fine.
But, so, as I'm reading this document you presented tonight, there's 595 and 100, having a hard time. $600,000 shy, shy $5,000. That could be cut without necessarily having those impacts that you're talking about in terms of reducing professional development and reducing the level of service that Gray residents get.
Yes, not to any extent that we couldn't hold off for another year, with the caveat being the conversation about the FY25 set aside. You know, when that conversation started, the town's proposed CIP budget included a $900,000 fire safety vehicle. So your capital projection for FY25 was $2 million and change. If you're doing a lease purchase of that fire vehicle for $100,000 a year, your capital budget goes to $1,301,000 for next year. That's $143,000 less than what was proposed, $1,444,000 in this year's budget. So, you know, there's not a ton of room, but there's some room. And at the level that you are at, you know, with that $600,000 of easier to identify cuts, we can make it work.
And do we know what that, and I hate to ask this question, and it might, but do we know what that looks like in terms of a percentage increase in the mill
A
rate?
very rough projection, very rough estimate is about a half of a mil, 0.5 mil for $600,000.
So would it go from 1395 to what, 14.4?
It would go from I gotta remember the number that we ended at.
So-
15.82, it would go down to like 15.3. Let me see if I can find that number.
You're talking about percentage or?
No,
Yeah.
the overall.
Okay,
no.
so
Oh,
if
the mill
we
rate. It
cut
was-
that much, it would add a half a mil.
You'd go
to
from
the-
15.78 projection
yeah.
to approximately 15.28, roughly.
Oh, that would cut cut that much off of.
It would cut, yeah,
What was
roughly
in that
approximately,
proposal.
and please, nobody hold me to this as
Yeah,
an
yeah.
ironclad figure, but that's roughly it, yeah.
And do we know what that amounts to in terms of that, I think it was a 13% increase?
Yeah, so if the current mill
That the
rate
voters
was
rejected.
13.94, I can do some quick math here.
You're talking about taking off this approximately 600,000
Yes.
rather than the 800,
Correct.
aiming for the LD1 800,000 that we were trying.
That's a 9.6%
Okay,
increase.
so essentially still a 10%
Quick math.
increase.
If
Yeah.
I got it wrong, I apologize.
No, I understand. I'm just looking for a ballpark at this point.
Yeah, I mean, just realistically, and I know this is not anything anyone wants to hear, including myself. I don't like when my taxes go up either, but everything's gone up, and all the towns around us had at least, I believe, some increase in their taxes this year.
Mhm.
There's not gonna be any way for us to get this to a 0%.
I would, that would, I don't think
That's
that,
not gonna happen.
That's not realistic at
and
all.
I don't think it's desirable either.
Right.
No.
Right, I mean, and my own thought is, at some level, we were punished for the error that was made in the budget.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's no doubt about that in my mind, and I don't at all blame people for that. I think all of us were, as upset as anybody else when we discovered that error.
Yeah.
So I think we're pushing back against that question of confidence in what we say and how we present ourselves. I think it's imperative that we sharpen our pencil and do more than just our regular due diligence to make sure that the information that we have going forward is accurate. And I think it's gonna take us time to, win back some of the support that we had prior to that mistake.
Mhm.
And we just have to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think if we had known, if we had known that the revenue estimates we were working with, when we voted on the warrant articles in April were inaccurate, we probably, I know, as a council, we would have
Would
made,
not have
we would have
presented
made
that budget to
expense, we
people.
would have made
Yeah.
expense adjustments
Yep.
that lowered what we were presenting to the public, in terms of cost, but we, I was just, as Dan said, I was just as upset when I realized that we had missed the error. All five of us missed the error. Nate missed the error. We missed the error. And, we have some culpability in that, but, yeah, so we need to make amends in terms of what we need to cut. And that's what we're trying to do. But I just want to be clear that it's not realistic that we're not gonna see any increase, because it's just not the environment we're working in the economy that we're working in, so it's.
And I'm not suggesting that we should have a zero.
No, I
increase
know
budget.
you're not.
No, I just want to be clear,
Yeah.
I'd rather over-communicate at this point in
Yeah.
time than under-communicate, yeah. If it turns out that the 811 is too big a step to take, I can have that proven to me.
Mhm.
But it seems at this point in time, still a reasonable goal.
Right.
And
You
when
know,
I
we
say
have-
it's not desirable to have a 0% increase, I just mean within the reality that you described.
Right.
Everything goes up.
Mhm.
If the town's expenses went down, I'd be fine with a 0% increase, but,
Right.
that's just not the world we live in.
One thing I would like to see going forward that's a little bit of an aside is when you look at our budget documents, like I'm looking at the, the expense detail report. Came out on April 12th. It's on our budget page. When I click on that report, when I open that report, it's not labeled as the expense budget report detail. The label it has is some manner of gobbledygook that our system creates for file names that I'm sure the computer understands, but that I don't. And I think frankly, that causes confusion. because you see it labeled as one thing, and then you look at the document itself, and it doesn't have that same label. And frankly, I'm confused. And it bothers me to say that, because I'm a town councilor, and I'm supposed to understand exactly what all this stuff is. Somehow, and I don't know how we do that, but somehow we have got to not only streamline the reporting process, but we've got to get a grip on how we label and date things and make it clear who it was that's creating these documents, so that when we have a question, we know who to go to. And I don't know who to go to when I see 10 underscore dash underscore 1 dash underscore G dash underscore, and it goes on quite a bit longer, and I won't. But that is a significant point of frustration for me, I will admit. And so I think identifying on our website for the budget for the FY '24, identifying which one of those documents we want to use going forward would be worth doing.
Go ahead, Matthew. Did you have something?
Sorry.
No, I just want to just leave it at agreeing with what Dan just said.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we need the expense budget for FY '24.
right.
We need the revenue budget for FY '24.
Mhm.
We need the CIP budget for FY '24, and I think we need to see at least 5 years out
On the CIP?
on CIP.
Yeah, I would
And if you
agree.
want to suggest cutting the 325,000 from CIP, then I need to see sort of in increments. This is what it would be if we leave the 325 in, this is what it would be if we took it all out. This is what it would be if we took half of it out.
Do you, so the way the CIP has been presented to us in the past, especially in future CIPs, there's the summary spreadsheet that just has totals, and then we have a more detailed document that lists actual line items that the total represents. So which document, when you say you want to see 5 years into the future, are you talking about the summary spreadsheet that just,
The document that is labeled on the town's website, FY '24 to FY '32, CIP fund projection summary.
the summary?
That's not what it's
Okay.
labeled when you open it, but
Right,
but
okay.
that's the link.
So you don't want to necessarily see the detailed line-by-line item?
At this
until
point
the-
in time, no, I think it's,
Yeah.
you know, I want to see what the impact, if we can live with the impact of the change, in other words, we don't open a big hole in the future, I could support that. If we take that 325 out now and that rips a hole in CIP 4 years from now, then I'm gonna have some concerns, because we're gonna have to figure out how to fill that. And the problem we got into 6 years ago when I first got on the council was that, quite frankly, councils had been taking CIP money, and rather than spending it on CIP, they were using it to pay down the mill rate. And we got in a hell of a pickle, and then we had the ladder truck that was on the horizon. And we did the bonding, some of which will start to go away soon. And fortunately, the townspeople put enough trust in the council then to do the bond, and that bond has allowed us to meet our CIP obligations without hammering people's taxes over the last few years. I don't want to jeopardize that good work. The future is only going to get more expensive. It's not going to get cheaper. I mean, we're paying, just take striping, we're paying twice as much for striping as we did, 2 years ago?
Right.
So, I'm never in favor of robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Okay,
And
No.
I would just like to add to that, those documents you said we needed should be readily available to the public too.
They're
so
on
that
our
they-
website
that
now.
They're on our website, but, you do have to sort of scroll through, like a page of documents, and if you're not sure exactly what document you're looking for, it could be.
Yep.
Could be difficult, but if we had like an agenda or a packet that had a link, rather than print it all out, but,
Yeah,
ma-
that,
ma-
you know,
ma-
perhaps we should be adding links to, our packet documents, you know, in the header or something that would go to the subsequent document on the budget
Well, our agenda,
website.
yeah, our agenda packets do have all the documents, but not the links, that's right.
Right, yeah, go ahead, Nate, I know we need to
I'll-
move on.
I'll just add to that, I hear what you're saying about confusion around those documents. There were so many versions.
Yeah.
There
Oh, I
was so many
Right.
things coming out. My intent here was to just try to date stamp these things, but
Mhm.
there was like version 3, version 4, and then there were date stamps, and then time stamps, like you'd get one in the morning and one in the afternoon. I know you are talking about streamlining your budget process for next year, and I certainly welcome that. The intent of this budget page was to, anybody who wanted to drink from the ocean of data that we have could go and drink from it.
It
And
was
if-
transparency, I
Yeah,
appreciate
we're
that.
just trying to put it all out there, but
Yep.
yes, it is daunting. There is a long laundry list of material here. And when we present your revised budget material, we'll bring it down to just the core glass of water that everyone needs to drink.
Yeah, and like I say, and make it clear to the public what that core is.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know, so
and
that-
name the documents in a way that makes sense.
And, you know, I mean, and if there's some way to have these other documents available at a click,
We'll
That-
keep
that's
all
great.
this here, and
Yeah.
we'll just
Right.
create a new
but
page.
it's like, this is
Yeah.
what we're looking at.
Right, I think we need to have a very succinct, maybe 1 to 5 documents that are gonna explain what we're presenting at town meeting, somewhere that is easy to access.
Well, or at least the revisions are always on top, and you can go to
Something,
another page to
yeah.
find the other revisions if you want.
So just to wrap up, because we do need to transition
Yep.
to the vault conversation. For documents for Thursday, Nate, do you think it's reasonable that we would be able to have all the revenues, expenses, and the CIP
So
content?
I can provide you the pick list of the material that's already, all of this has already been produced, so I'll just grab all of this out of what was in the budget presentation
Okay.
and put it into a packet for you, and
Okay.
yeah, we'll create a new page for your budget revision process.
Okay. And then at the end of this, I think we should try to at least recreate for digital distribution another flyer that summarizes everything we land on. And then we may want to revisit having a direct mailer again if needed. I don't know what that would cost or if it's worth it, but we can talk about that at
I've
the
had
end of
zero
this.
feedback on the previous one, so I don't know if
Really?
you have.
No, I mean, other than my own. I liked getting it in the mail, but I'm weird like that.
Can I just quickly
Yeah,
just say one thing?
Sure.
I want to make sure I've got the whole list. You want the budget proposal, the expense and revenue budget proposals for '24,
mhm.
the CIP but cleaned up of all the strike
The
lines.
Line items for FY '24.
You want the CIP budget for 5 years out,
The
and we'll
summary.
give you the summary sheet
Mhm.
also for that. Any
Yeah.
other items that you want?
We had, I think you mentioned, well, we had the summary that basically gave us is that the document that you're thinking of that combines
Sure, I'll
everything
show
onto
you
one
what I
page?
think we're talking about. It's got 24, 25, 26.
Yes, yeah, that's for CIP.
Yeah, that's the CIP one.
But we had our summary document that had basically the operations budget, the operations expenses, the CIP expenses, revenue, and then,
This one.
He's talking about the summary document that,
it's a spreadsheet.
it's a
yeah.
spreadsheet that
I can
think,
I can give you an example
it's
of
this
that one. Yeah.
overall budget summary that was the one that had the error in it.
Yes,
So,
Oh, yeah, that's
That-
what
yeah.
that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, yes.
And for my purposes, you know, like a link to a spreadsheet to look at on my computer is actually more, you know, and one that I know that I'm looking at the right thing is more useful than a paper document.
I'll
or
send
a
council
PDF.
everything on share, the OneDrive share, so you can get to it.
okay. I think this was a good start, just to kind of get our bearings. And hopefully we can get more into the weeds on Thursday, and then we'll see where we're at and whether or not we need to add, or probably how many more meetings
Yep.
we need to add to finalize things. Let's just transition to discussing the Vault Trail extension and the CDBG grant fund supporting that. You have a memo from Kristen, the planner, on packet page 16, outlining the situation. Basically, we had a community development block grant for FY '23 awarded to us to expand the village area loop trail from the Pennell complex around across the street into the purchased Gateway property across the street. We hired a design firm for $14,000 to design the trail and the extraneous things around it. And then that left us with approximately $52,000, almost $53,000 to actually implement the trail and have it constructed. The lowest bid we received for construction was well over that amount at $94,231. But we asked the reviewing committee to bring the scope down, so we were gonna do less plantings and change the configuration of the trails so that it wasn't costing quite as much. They've done that, but essentially, we had worked with, I believe, some of the property owners abutting the space were promised a fence, and the cost of that fence is is basically well over the amount we can afford based on our CDBG grant. So this conversation is to decide whether or not the extra $14,000 it will take to build that promised fence is important enough to find the funds in a different account. A couple of us proposed using the sub-D account, which is supposed to be strictly for recreational purposes around town, which this is. It's a trail for public use, recreational use. But we had in FY '24 set aside some funds out of that already as part of the FY '24 budget to support a grant match that we're doing to replace the boat ramp at Wilkie's, to sod the new Stillwater Pines rec facility, not sod it, put loam down so that they can
More
seed
loom
it
than they were
better.
intending on putting down,
Yeah, and then we're also setting aside $50,000 to support a grant match for the renovated and reconstructed Douglas Field baseball field in that Gateway property. So that leaves us with a balance in the sub-D account for FY '24 of, what I'm seeing here is around $17,500. Technically, that is enough to fund this $14,000 fence, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable depleting that account to what would essentially be $3,000. So, Dan, go ahead.
The grant that we have for the boat ramp is, there was a time frame for the use of that money, I think. Am I correct, or am I confusing it with another grant?
No, there is a time frame.
And do we know when that deadline
don't.
is? Okay,
I don't.
that would be a question for me. I don't wanna put that off, but, and I certainly don't wanna jeopardize the grant, but I guess I'd like to know if there's any wiggle room there. The other piece of it is the $50,000 that we were putting towards the Douglas Field. I don't know if that was a set amount that we needed, that it needed to be $50,000 in order to be eligible for the grant, or it was just good faith money to show that we were willing to participate. If it's the latter, I would be willing to put $40,000 towards that instead of the 50.
You know,
But I
I
don't wanna
also-
jeopardize that
right, I
effort
also
either.
don't recall, I know it was I believe there was a percentage match required for those MLB, was the Major League Baseball
Yeah.
grant for, but I don't recall if 50,000 was the percentage that we needed to come
Yeah.
up with, or if it was just a approximate cost of the match.
So I agree with you, I'd rather not deplete the funds completely, but I do feel like we have to find the money from somewhere, so. I guess those are my opening questions.
Go
So,
ahead, Nick.
Mo Russo is out and won't be back before your next meeting, so I doubt I'll
Okay.
get that answer in detail for you about
Okay.
the boat ramp. I can try. And then as far as Douglas Field goes, I can check with the Little League and former Counselor Carter to see if that would be a giant hurt for them.
Yeah, Sandy would know whether that
Yeah,
was,
I know she was more intimately involved with
Right.
those conversations, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one
Yeah, yeah.
second. The other recreation fund we have that's flexible and doesn't affect the mill rate. I just wanna be clear, these sub D and enterprise accounts don't affect, expenses as part of the mill rate. But, the enterprise account is funding staff costs related to recreation specifically. Is that correct, Nate? Or is there any flexibility in the enterprise account also to fund recreation projects around town?
I can't give you a good answer on that. I need to check around.
Okay. Go ahead, Matthew, sorry
No,
to
no,
interrupt
no.
you.
Not at all. I guess first of all, I would just like to say that this memo from Kristen is excellent
It is, yeah.
and, clear and just, like sort of a model for what I would like to see, generally. But I notice in here, she says that she corresponded with the contractor and regarding the ability to further reduce planting and bench pads and use those funds toward the fencing. But he said it only comes to around $3,000 of an approximate $14,000 expense. So I'm just wondering, is it possible to cut out those plantings and bench pads and put that $3,000 towards the fence?
And so then we would need to come up with an $11,000 difference rather than 14. I don't know, Kristen, would you mind coming up just to answer that?
I know that some of the plantings are, depending on where you're talking, are there to try and prevent people from going through onto the school property. So it was kind of an integral part of and I think some other cuts were made before that, but you know it better than I, Kristen.
Yeah, Matthew was wondering, so the $3,000 that you had talked about in additional cuts with the contractor to cover the fence, wouldn't cover the full $14,000, so it would just be $3,000 in additional cuts. So could we make those cuts and then only could need to come up with $11,000 extra, or
I think
how is that gonna work?
there are, as Dan alluded to, there were a couple of, I don't want to say promises, but there were a couple of things shown on the plan that were key for abutters. One was the plantings that discouraged people from going toward the Russell School, and one was the fencing for the Goodridges, who are the closest to the trail as far as abutting property with no other existing buffer.
Right.
So those are the pieces we're looking to preserve. So I think eliminating all of the plantings would impact what we presented as happening on that berm with SED 15. So that would be of concern, but I think we could save some of that. He was actually the one who, the contractor was the one who proposed that we should, that we could do the nice pads for the benches, because it would be a nice amenity and would keep them from getting stolen. But that's not something we necessarily need to have. So I think there is a little wiggle room there. I don't know that it would be a full 3,000 if we want to maintain that, what was presented for the berm to SED
Okay.
15.
Would we still be able to install benches without the bench pads? Like, could we just
Yeah,
put them
like
into
here,
the
they
grass?
don't have
and-
pads.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, because I think I would like to see benches. I know that's a request
key.
from a lot of seniors in town, so.
Mm. But, there was also this idea of phasing that Kristen proposed. And I understand the idea that if you reduce the fence length, you'll end up getting less fence for your, per foot. I'm just wondering if there are other things that could be phased, like the planting or the benches.
We've sort of hacked away at this a couple of times already.
Okay.
I think it's not to say that more couldn't be cut, but I think since we do have some funds available that won't affect people's property taxes, I'm more inclined to go that way at this point than to pare back the project anymore, personally.
So, given kind of the uncertainties of like the final number with, it sounds like you could play around with what the contractor's proposing versus what we really need to retain, and so we don't actually have a final number. What do you need from us tonight? I know we're voting on the whether or not you can negotiate a contract on Tuesday. So what do you need from us today, basically?
I think, go ahead.
I think the goal with, and thank you for fitting this in, I know this is a
Yeah.
busy time. The contractor's on a schedule where things are getting very busy for him, and he wants to
Right.
know, is this a go or is it a no-go?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just to be clear, the benches are not included as part of this scope either. We're hoping they'll be maybe donated or built, or they're not even included. We've reduced the scope significantly.
Great Eagle
Um,
Scout project for
yeah,
anybody who
yeah,
might be
Yeah,
listening.
and SAT 15 is interested, we've spoken with them already. But so the idea of coming to you tonight was to ask, I just didn't want to, per Nate's direction and the council's direction, I've been trying to work with the contractor to come up with a point where we could sign a contract. And I just didn't want to make that call on my own about, do we eliminate the fence now and wait, or do we try to find some way to fund it now? So that's what I wanted to bring up to you now and answer your questions tonight. So maybe it's something you can consider on Tuesday if you want to. Do we want to wait? We will probably be looking to pursue, if the council supports it, a phase 2 for this site anyway, because we've reduced the scope of the trail significantly, in part because the crosswalk can't be done yet.
Right.
The planning board did not approve the leg that would connect to the crosswalk. So when we get to the point where that piece of road is reconfigured, or whatever DOT ends up doing with it, and it's an appropriate time to put in a crosswalk, we would likely be looking to a phase 2 to extend the trail as intended to connect to this trail panel.
Right.
So
But
there
that's-
is a phase 2 possibility on the horizon, but it would probably be a ways out, and we
Yeah.
did speak about this fence publicly, so I wanted to bring that to council to get your feedback on how to proceed.
Right, that was gonna be my point, is that the crosswalk is probably not gonna be built for at least 2 to 5
My
years.
lifetime.
So, I think, personally, I'd like to see the trail complete as much as possible as part of phase 1. And I know we don't have a final number here, but we do have a little rec money that we can, in these accounts that are a little more flexible to play with. And if we could get some of the questions we asked about, that Dan was asking about, the Douglas Field and Wilkes Beach grant matches, and what kind of flexibility we have around there, we can kind of see what our final availability of funds is.
You could sort of do a straw poll if you wanted to just see if,
Yeah, what are, that's a
I
good
mean,
point,
you
yeah,
know, would we support
using. some-
finding the money, knowing that we have it here, whether we can make other changes or
Right,
not?
yep, that's a good point, Dan, so would you support,
I would,
you
yes.
would, finding some extra funds?
Yes, I think we can do this.
Yes.
Yeah, I support it, and I guess I'll sort of withdraw on my $3,000 question based on what Dan said.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you might still be you're gonna work with the contractor to get this down as low as you can.
Yep, there is
but-
still some leeway, I think, but
Mhm.
maybe not the full
Right.
3,000. If you kind of agree that it's still a priority to do what we proposed on the SAT 15 side as well.
I just want us to do what we need to do so you can go away
Right.
and not have to come back to us again, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
That we give you enough leeway that you can get it done.
Yep, get
That's
it
what I
rolling.
wanna
Yep.
make sure we do.
Go ahead,
So
Nate.
just to be clear, we're asking for your guidance on this tonight because Kristen will be out of town next week.
Yeah.
There is an agenda item on your council meeting agenda next week with a draft motion, like authorize the town manager to enter in a contract negotiation with so-and-so. I will ask if you will amend that to include a source of funds and a not-to-exceed amount.
Yeah.
And then I can work with Kristen and the vendor on that. We need to get your approval because it's an appropriation of town
Right.
funds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I just don't wanna box you in
Right,
without
exactly.
giving you enough room to get it
Right.
done, I guess.
But I think we're all in favor of completing it as much as we can.
Yes, yeah.
Even though it's gonna go over the grant. We just like to make sure it's not too, as much, as little over the grant amount as possible.
We don't wanna go back on what we've essentially promised the abutters who have agreed to do this for us.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Is anything else you need from us, or is you?
I just want to be here to make sure I was here to
Okay.
answer your questions
All right.
before Tuesday. If there are other materials I can provide, I can certainly reach out to him again, see if we can get a response about details about how much we can cut, and maybe it won't come to whatever cap you set, hopefully not. But,
Yeah, I think that would be good, just to have some updated figures from him that by Tuesday, if you can get that done. But-
Yeah,
but,
if we-
yeah.
okay, if we hear back.
All right.
Yep, will do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you,
Thank you.
Kristen. All right, I guess that's it for tonight. We are stopping at 6:45 by some miracle, so. Yeah, I will adjourn the town council workshop for June 13th. Have a good night, everyone.
Yes, thank you.